Lieutenant Colonel Stanton, good afternoon, class. Today I will be giving you a current events brief on the Ukraine and Russia conflict. This conflict began in 2014, and I chose this topic because recently all the local news and national news has been concerned with coronavirus, and even though that is playing a part within the conflict, I thought this would be a good way to give a current event brief that's not about coronavirus, because that's what we've only been talking about for the past couple weeks. So today I will be talking a brief overview over the conflict, some of the background leading up to it, the current situation within Ukraine, the future of the conflict, and then a conclusion and summary. So let's begin. A little background on the conflict is in 2014, the Ukraine turned down a deal that would give them entry into the EU to create better relations with Russia. This decision was voted upon in the Ukraine government, but it caused massive violent riots from um, anti-Russian demonstrators. But Ukraine is a kind of a difficult circumstance because the Ukraine was in the Soviet Union for so long. There's a lot of pro-Russians within the country itself. When the riots broke out in different parts of Ukraine, Russia took the opportunity to annex Crimea and then move forces into the eastern Ukraine. Once Crimea was already annexed, and most of the riots had kind of calmed down, a ceasefire was called between Ukraine and Russia called the Minsk II. But currently, and ever since it was written, no government, not Ukraine or Russia, actually follows the treaty, and there have been over 400,000 violations of the treaty. Now, rogue Ukrainian armed militias are holding back pro-Russian separatist forces in the eastern part of Ukraine. And I'm reading slides right now, but I'll post the slides under my video after I post this on eCampus. Next, the current situation within the conflict zone. Like I said, it's mostly in the eastern part of Ukraine. U.S. forces in Europe are currently fighting Corona with over 73,000 troops stationed in Europe. And the Corona is spreading, which is affecting the war zone as we speak. To tell you how recent this is, like between March 4th and 24th of this month, there have already been 14 killed and 70 wounded on the conflict zone. That's both. So the people who are fighting aren't necessarily Russian forces, but they are militias and separatist groups that were already within Ukraine, and now these groups are fighting each other, even though neither one of them is being officially backed by either government. Another problem this is creating is the militias, since they aren't really being controlled by the government. If the Ukraine government told the militias to stand down, they would have a huge problem on their hands because these militias have already openly stated that they're not listening to the government, and if the government tried to shut them down, that they would fight the Ukraine government itself. So that's what Ukraine's dealing with. It's kind of a very sticky situation of whether letting these pro-militia or rogue militia groups continue, or to just ceasefire and have to make a deal with Russia. Currently, combat is being conducted on the ground, air, and water between Ukraine forces and Russian forces. Ukraine is attempting to coordinate with NATO, trying to get more European backing on this conflict, trying to deter Russia from backing even more separatist groups. But Russia has already openly stated, Putin has already openly stated that he's trying to claim back a lot of the land that the Russian government lost during the breakup of the Soviet Union. Currently, the U.S. has also sent $1.2 million in medical and humanitarian aid. This was happening before and has now increased during the corona epidemic. So, some of the future implications of the conflict is if the conflict continues to rise in violence with more and more people joining both sides, NATO could have to intervene on the behalf of Ukraine to try to stop Russia. U.S. might also have to pick a side. I know we're trying to maintain good relations with the Russians, but Trump doesn't want Putin to gain even more footing in Russia. So the U.S. involvement so far has been covert, but with Russia continuing its advance into Ukraine, it could create another Cold War scenario. Ukraine is torn by pro-Russian groups and pro-Ukrainian fighting for the future of Ukraine. And this is, none of the militia groups are really united. So there's a couple different factions within the militias, which makes it an even more unstable area. Because if one militia group has decided that the other one, they aren't on the same terms, they might start going at each other. There's just a lot of people in this melting pot of a conflict, and I was watching a couple documentaries about it, and really no one knows what's going on or what the overall objective is, besides Ukraine militia groups just saying like, we don't want to be part of Russia, but they also don't want to listen to the laws of the Ukraine government. So it's kind of a weird situation. In conclusion, Ukraine has always been a desire of Russia to have a strong presence in the Black Sea region. This being the case, Russia will not stop claiming most of it, if not all of Ukraine, as their own. Operations along the conflict zone have been unofficial, but situations such as this do not stay between militia groups long before superpowers get involved. So overall, I've given you a brief overview of the conflict, some background, and maybe some of the future implications. Right now, most of the media is covering coronavirus, but this conflict has been going on since 2014. So it's kind of interesting to see how we're not hearing about it a lot, even though they're still openly fighting each other over there. And this concludes my brief. If there are any questions, please feel free to email me or talk on eCampus. Thank you.